All right, so I hope you had a chance to install a code editor that you like. Again, there are lots of different ones. Feel free to try out every single one if you want. And the best way to learn each one is just through practice. I'm actually going to close the terminal for now, or actually move it to the side. We'll come back to it later. But I'm going to use Visual Studio Code as mentioned, and that's how we're going to proceed with a lot of our new examples. So I'm going to move some of this out of the way. And let's go on to template strings. So again, if you're wondering where I'm resourcing a lot of my information, it is just on slides.com/javascriptla and then /guide to ES6. It's actually inside the video description here below on YouTube. So feel free to click the link if you want to look ahead and see some of the examples. That said, you can just pretty much follow along with the video. I'm pretty much going to do all of the examples in the video. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is basically look at an example of a template string. So if you've ever done any kind of JavaScript before, you know that you first have to basically, I guess when you use a code editor, you have to first create a new file, right? And then you get this or a new window. Then basically you have to look for the JavaScript language here. So you just click on this little part that says plain text, and then you type JavaScript, and that'll give you the JavaScript syntax coloring. And then, yeah, if I want to start typing JavaScript, I can basically start right here. So I'm going to use the var keyword first, and I'm going to say var x is equal to 10. And then I'm going to and I'm actually going to use old style JavaScript, so I'm going to actually encourage you to use semicolons too. Anytime you're working with older JavaScript, or you want to just be more precise with your JavaScript, use a semicolon, because that indicates, hey, this is the end of the line, or end of the statement, end of the expression. So when you're working in ES6, and if you've noticed so far, a lot of the examples I've done have not used semicolons, ES6 is pretty smart. It can detect where to put a semicolon. And so a lot of developers now who just write a lot of JavaScript don't even bother using the semicolon. I still recommend it. And, there are cases where I'm pretty, loose about my semicolons. And then there are cases where I use semicolons all the time. So typically when I'm working in ES5, I tend to use the semicolons. Or if I really want to be sure that my code ends on a certain line, I'll use a semicolon. That way it doesn't confuse the compiler. But I also just kind of let JavaScript ES6 do its thing, because part of coding is about learning to let the computer do stuff, abstracting, the code for you. As you get more advanced as a developer, you don't want to be doing manual things, tedious things all the time, right? The whole point of becoming a developer, a coder, is to make your life easier. And so the reason ES6 was made was to make it easier for coders to write out, JavaScript that looks a little bit more like English. If you've used other languages like Python, it's also the same concept, right? Rather than having to write out strict, Java level syntax, or maybe C++ level syntax, you get easier syntax that looks just like English. And you can just expect the computer to take care of the boring stuff underneath the hood. I'm not giving you an excuse here to be super lazy, but realize though, we want to make using the computer more and more convenient for people, especially when we create software. So we don't want to trap people in doing boring tasks. We want to give them power to automate. And so that's kind of a little bit of a a tangent that I went on. But it's important to realize that now before you keep going further and further down this playlist. So anyway, coming back to this, I'm going to come, whenever I come back to ES5, I'm going to use the semicolon syntax because it's helpful. But then when I'm writing in ES6, I may not use semicolons. Okay, so I've got a variable named x, and I'm going to give it the value of 10. Then I'm going to create one more called y, of course, and give it another value, 20. And just for simplicity, I'm just going to say that result is equal to a string. Notice the two quotes, by the way, double quotes, indicating a string. And remember, a string holds like words, content, whatever we want to save in a variable. So I'm going to say Robert has, and then I'm going to concatenate this string with an integer value, right? So concatenate just means add. It's a fancy way of saying add in computer science. And so let's just do Robert has X apples. Okay, so if I console.log the result here, and I go to file save. Actually, just for shorthand, I'm going to hit command save or control save on my computer. So that's what I'm going to do. And let's go ahead and put this, let's see here. I will put this maybe here, I guess. I don't know. Make a new folder and call it just tutorials. And I'll just call it my first one. Let's see here. Template strings. And of course, any code that I put in these tutorials, I'll try to have like a GitHub that matches for that. So at a future point, I'll link a card to a GitHub or something like that, or I'll put in the description. But so yeah, you know, feel free to look at all the code that I put on the Git, or you can also, you know, just try to follow along and recreate these files on your own too. It's no problem. All right, so, but I'm saving it on my computer. I am doing it from, I think, let's see here, where's this? So from my user folder into a folder called JavaScript LA into a folder called tutorials. Feel free to save your own version of this wherever you like. So I'm going to save. Okay, so that gives me the save function. Now the cool thing about Visual Studio Code is that you can run a terminal inside of Visual Code. So I'm going to do that too. And voila, just like I have a terminal down here with purple colors, I have a terminal right here inside Visual Studio Code. So this actually makes it easier for me to just do coding quickly as opposed to having to have like multiple things running in the background. So I am first going to use Linux style commands. And again, if you're not familiar with these, feel free to just follow along and do what I'm doing. Copying, you know, and imitating are pretty much like the easiest way to learn first. I know that when you first start programming, it's kind of like hard because it's like, what do all these commands mean? You know, and then you want to like resource all day, like what are the different commands? But just do it, you know, like if nothing else, just imitate. That's how like toddlers learn too. They just imitate their parents, and then eventually they start figuring out, oh, okay, this is how English actually works, or this is how my language that I'm learning actually works, and then they go back and correct it. So that's what I'm going to advise to you too. So right now I'm just saying cd, and I'm going to change directory. So I'm changing directory in my computer to the folder directory that holds this template strings. So I'm going to start off with this particular thing here basically just means my user folder. So actually, before I do cd, I'm going to say pwd, which basically just means what directory am I in, present working directory, and that would be users/Vijay. On Windows, this will also work too, as long as you've installed git bash. So just make sure that you've installed git bash, otherwise these Unix styled commands will not work, and you'll have to do other things like dir, which is only for Windows. But make sure you install git bash, and then that way you can follow along if you're using Windows. And just, I guess for clarity, I know I'm throwing out a lot of things at you guys right now, but here is git bash, like if you ever were like trying to figure that out. So actually it's a second link. So git for Windows. Make sure you download this, install that, and then all these commands that I'm throwing out will work on your computer if you're just using Windows. Okay, back to this. Essentially, I'm going to cd over to that folder that I was pointing to. So I think it's JavaScript LA, and then cd over to tutorials. I just made it, and then I'm going to type ls to basically see what's inside the folder, and there should only be one thing, the template strings file. Now I'm going to say node template strings JS. So after all of that, I'm able to finally see my JavaScript code run in the command line. We're still using Node as our environment. Notice we haven't actually changed over to a browser and started using it there. If I wanted to put this in our browser, I could just create an HTML document and then include this JavaScript as a script file, and then I could expect to see that work in my browser as well. And we'll do that later. trust me, I'm going to get to all these things eventually. I just want you to start understanding like these different fundamentals. Okay, so this is a basic way of doing a template string in ES5. However, in ES6, we can shorten a lot of this by just saying, okay, let result equal, and this time we're going to use backtick syntax. So look for the backtick symbol on your keyboard, and once you find it, hit it, and then let Visual Studio autocomplete for you the other backtick. If it doesn't, then you're going to want to have an extra backtick. Same thing, if Visual Studio is not auto-completing for you, what you can do is actually you can go over to, I think, let's see, is this the marketplace? Extensions, all right, so extensions. What you'll want to do is just look for JavaScript and then press syntax. And I think, let's see, it probably comes with Visual Studio Code just out of the box. But if not, you can look for it, look for something that makes sense to you, like you can get a description about it, and then click install. And again, like I'll go through all that later in a different video, but out of the box, you should have some basic auto-completion syntax. So I'm going to move out of this, right, and then come back to this. So one more thing. So now I'm going to actually say, all right, so Robert has, and here I'm going to use plugin syntax. And this is new to JavaScript. This is new to ES6. And essentially, this basically says Robert has X, right, which is 10, and I actually need to fill in the sentence here, and Y, bananas. Okay, so if I console log result, right, and because I'm using the same variable name again, maybe let's just call this something else. I know that this would still kind of overwrite it, but we don't want to do that. We don't have strange results. So let's go ahead and save this. And let's take a look at what we get. So I'm going to write out the same thing again here, node template strings, and I'm going to hit tab to autocomplete on my terminal and press enter. So you'll see I get the first one says Robert has 10 apples, which comes from result. And then I have Robert has 10 apples and 20 bananas using this plugin syntax with template strings. So breaking this down, and I'm going to actually fix it so it looks a little cleaner. But breaking this down, right, whenever you use backticks, ES6 basically allows you to drop in variables. You don't have to do string concatenation where you break the string and then you add, you know, a number, and then you go back and then have it to write another string, and then, you know, add another and another and another, right? Like if I wanted to add Y, I would have to do plus Y. So this kind of like just takes me, you know, more steps to just do what I need to do, whereas plugin syntax or template syntax basically just makes it a lot easier to just write a string, not have to break it, and then throw in variables as needed. So it's really handy. All right, I hope you liked this particular lecture, and in the next one, we'll go ahead and talk about more advanced template strings.